Hello, Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. Thank you for tuning into my channel. So, today I'm coming back to the resurrection, and I've made videos about the resurrection before. The reason that I keep coming back to the resurrection is because, as many Christians have said, that the whole of Christianity succeeds or fails on the resurrection. If Christ was not raised, then the whole of Christianity is in vain. I keep coming back to the resurrection. It's so important because I believe that it's the most important task for atheists and critical thinkers to try and bring some sense to the resurrection arguments. We have a lot of magical thinking which is going on, and in my opinion, irrational arguments which simply don't add up. The problem with the resurrection, and apologists for the resurrection who are claiming that it's a historical fact, is that the people who are arguing this have got such a strong vested interest in the truth, in the supposed truth of the resurrection, that they are inventing this magical thinking and this magical way of reasoning and assessing evidence in order to arrive at their desired conclusion. Now, it's very difficult to argue with people who already very strongly believe in God and already strongly believe in the resurrection and are reasoning backwards and trying to piece together these very old documents and proving or thinking that they can prove that this extraordinary supernatural event took place approximately 2,000 years ago. So I watched, I think yesterday, Paulogia. I don't know if you've seen his channel. I do recommend it. He's got a sort of smallish channel, only 12.3k subscribers, but I've been following him and I think he's quite impressive. So I'll put a link beneath this video so you can go and watch his debate with S.J. Thomason, who is an apologist for the resurrection, and they actually have a very good discussion, and he goes through her meme, her argument for the resurrection, and gets her to agree to make corrections along the way. Some of the language that she's using, for example, such and such attests to the fact of the resurrection. So he's saying, well, the resurrection has not been established as a fact. You're in the process of trying to prove it. So before you can't say that it's a fact until you've established that it's a fact. So he's getting her to change the wording of her argument and her statements, which I thought was a brilliant approach. He went through one by one everything that she said about the resurrection, and he persuaded her to change so much that at the end of the day there wasn't really a lot left which could make up a plausible argument for the resurrection. And I thought the way he did that was quite brilliant. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and I'm impressed with him. I do recommend that you subscribe and watch his videos. His videos on Kent Hovind are absolutely hilarious. So that's a recommendation for those of you who've been watching Matt Dillahunty for years and years. And let's face it, he's fantastic and everything, but it's nice to see other atheists, and I think that Paulogia is actually quite a talent. He was a Christian, of course, and I believe that he's known by the people like William Lane Craig and others who, obviously, now that he's turned against them, they're throwing stones at him. So it's really worth following his channel. Anyway, let me move on. So yeah, the resurrection. My problem with the resurrection is essentially that what they're doing is something like in mathematics would be something like this: 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 10 to the power of a million. It is something so incredibly absurd. I don't know if you know what I mean by that. let's go through the resurrection claims. Let's look at some of the narrative and some of the claims that we can accept, and whether that will justify us in accepting the big claim, the 10 to the power of a million claim, if you know what I mean. So in the world right now, we've got things happening which, if you put them together, they're actually really quite mundane. They're actually quite mundane and fairly commonplace. Nothing supernatural is involved. And it would be a very unusual person to claim or appeal to a supernatural solution for a set of fairly mundane claims. I mean, even the Bermuda Triangle mystery that we heard a lot about in the 60s and 70s when aeroplanes started going missing, there were not really too many people who were claiming that this was some kind of supernatural event. It was left as a mystery, or there were some people who were claiming that there were alien spacecraft who were sucking these planes into their craft and disappearing with them. And that is an extraordinary claim, of course, because we know that aircraft can go missing. There are so many cases of aircraft that go missing. For example, the is it MH370 or the Malaysian Airlines aircraft that went missing in the Indian Ocean 5 or 6 years ago? There are plenty of cases of aircraft which have simply gone missing, usually over water, and there's been no trace of them, no wreckage whatsoever. And there are not too many people who will say, it was an alien spacecraft that sucked it out, and because obviously that would be an extraordinary claim. There's no other evidence for it. But they might say that this is the best explanation that fits the circumstances. We've got a flight which the plane was properly checked out and serviced. It took off, it went over the ocean. Air traffic control lost communication with the flight at such and such an hour in such and such a place, and it was never heard of again. It was lost from the radar screens at a particular longitude, latitude, and it was never seen again. No wreckage was found despite massive search. And some people might say that the best possible explanation for the explanation which best fits the facts that we know is that an alien spacecraft came and literally took it out of the air and just shot off into space with it. Some people might claim that, but they wouldn't be justified, of course, because we've got relatively commonplace claims there. An aeroplane took off, communication with the plane was lost, and the plane disappeared from the radar at such and such a place. There was a huge search that lasted several weeks. No wreckage was ever found. Those are all the facts that are indisputable. Not that unusual. In a way, fairly mundane claim. Fairly mundane in the sense that they have happened before, and no doubt they will happen again. And none of those claims are really that remarkable. None of them are supernatural. None of them are magical. None of them appeal to miracles or anything which goes against the forces of nature that we know of. And so, but then we've got another so-called solution, that we've got this extraordinary solution that some people are proposing, that an alien spacecraft came and sucked it out and took it away. Despite the fact we've got no evidence whatsoever that alien spacecraft have even visited the Earth. We've got no evidence of any extraterrestrial life ever in all the radio telescopes, all the searching we're doing. We have not got one signal back, and there's no evidence whatsoever that there even is any alien life. Of course, I'm not saying there isn't, but we haven't got any evidence that there is, let alone that there is such sophisticated alien life that it could come here in a highly technological craft and just literally take something the size of an aircraft out of the sky and disappear with it. So we've only got this in science fiction, and I've seen one or two films where something like that has happened. So we can really dismiss that claim because it's too fantastic compared with the detail of the circumstances, and the detail of the circumstances is too commonplace and too mundane in order to appeal in order to justify leaping to this fantastic claim. Now, I will say that the hypothesis that an alien spacecraft is coming and taking these aircraft out of the sky is slightly more believable, or more believable than that any solution whereby the laws of nature are subverted is appealed to. So, bearing that in mind, let's come on to the resurrection and just take a bit of a look at it. So, I'm no expert on the Bible. I did a new module on New Testament studies a long time ago, for the good that that did me. And most of what I know about the Bible now and New Testament scholarship, etc., has really come from my researching on YouTube, etc., reading one or two books. So on the Bible, so we've got four Gospels. The Gospel of Mark on the resurrection gives the least amount of detail. There's some suggestion, I believe there's some suggestion by some scholars that the final verses of Mark are interpolations. In other words, that there's no resurrection in Mark and that it was added later. Okay, maybe that's the case, maybe that isn't. And it would really weaken the case. Not that it would weaken the case for the resurrection, because the other three Gospels contain the resurrection, because I think that the case for the resurrection, even if we had four identical accounts in the four Gospels, in my view, is weak enough without even without, if we could somehow prove that the final verses of Mark were forgeries, to me it wouldn't make any difference because it doesn't add up anyway. But never mind about that. So, what have we got from more or less from the four Gospels? Okay, for the sake of argument, what facts, or at least what have we got in the narrative? What have we got in the narrative that we can look at? So let's say Jesus existed. Let's say that he traveled with his disciples preaching. Let's say that he was tried by Pontius Pilate and he was committed to crucifixion. Let's say that those are all true. Let's say those happened. Let's concede that, even though, again, I don't think they're terribly historical. So let's move on. So he was thrashed and he was humiliated, etc. Let's say that's true as well. He was crucified. His hands and his feet were nailed to the cross. The cross was hoisted up, and he was crucified in great pain. And he died. He definitively died. Let's now say that, despite it being custom and practice for Roman soldiers to take all the crucified bodies from the crosses and toss all the bodies into a huge communal grave. Let's say that in Jesus' case that didn't happen, although frankly I think it's hardly probable that it did. Let's say that it didn't happen, and let's believe the claim in, I think, at least one of the Gospels, that the Roman guards who watched over the crucifixion were bribed to release the body to the followers of Jesus, or whoever, somebody who wanted Jesus' body so that he could take the body and put it in a tomb. So let's say that the guards were bribed. I'm willing to accept that that may well have been the case. It's not, unless they were under really strict orders from Pontius Pilate, where they might fear that they would be executed or jailed themselves for not following his orders. Let's say there was no such concrete order, and that it was simply expected that those guards would dispose of the bodies as per the custom, but that they were bribed heavily by somebody in order to release Jesus' body. I think that's highly unlikely, frankly, because I think that in particular they would have wanted to humiliate Jesus' body as much as possible, tear it off the cross, not even bother to remove the nails, just tear his hands out, and just desecrate his body completely and toss it into a huge grave with all the other criminals and everything. I think it's highly likely that they would have wanted to do that just to make a complete example, because that's the whole point of crucifixion, is to make an example of people, not just the pain and the torture, but also the sheer humiliation of it. And unless that's complete, then the job isn't really fully done. But okay, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that one or more of the guards was actually paid and bribed to release the body. Let's say that that happened. You know, it's not an extraordinary claim. It's fairly mundane, I would say. And that Jesus' body was taken, and that it was taken to a tomb somewhere in the hills or wherever, not too far off. And it was placed in the tomb, and the entrance was covered up, and it was left there in order that some of Jesus' followers could come 1 or 2 days later. I think the following day was Sunday or Saturday, I can't remember, and they were forbidden to go to the body on the Sabbath, if I remember correctly, and so they had to go the day after. Let's suppose that these three women, and from what I understand, it's most likely that it would be women that went, because women typically embalmed the body, or anointed the body, cleaned it up, made it respectable, cleaned off all the wounds, cleaned it up so that it wasn't smelling and everything, and that they did that to it as per the custom. So let's say that it was women that went along and did that. I mean, men might have done it, but from what I've read about the history of those times, it was more likely that women would have done it. And so this argument that, I mean, I don't want to digress too much, but this argument that, because they put that women went and women were not reliable as witnesses, therefore, actually, it must have been the case. No, it was most likely that women would have gone, and that to say that it was men that went to clean the body, clean out the wounds, perfume it out and everything with fine oils, etc. To think that men would have done this instead of women seems fairly kind of unbelievable, and that if I was writing the gospel, knowing that women traditionally do this, I would put that in as a detail. So I don't want to digress, because that's another argument. Okay, so we've got so far lots of claims which, for me, they're not really that remarkable. None of them are. So we've got the body, we've got it in the tomb, we've got the tomb covered, we've got the women coming one day after the Sabbath with all the oils, perfumes, etc., with various cloths to embalm the body, or whatever they did. And we've got the women arriving at the tomb. Okay, this is all completely believable up to now. And then we've got the women arriving at the tomb and looking inside it and finding that actually it's empty. Okay. So far, everything is completely believable. I wouldn't say it's historical, but there's nothing for me remarkable in any of those details. Nothing at all. I'm prepared to accept from a Christian or William Lane Craig or anybody. I'm prepared to concede all of that, even though I still don't think it's historical. But let's say that all those mundane claims happened. We've got a string of ones at the moment, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. Maybe actually the Romans handing over the body could be like a 3 or a 4. And maybe the body disappearing could be like maybe a 5. I don't know. But we've got some fairly mundane claims up to now. The body's not in the tomb. And then all of a sudden, we've got a claim that goes from like a 1, a 2, or a 3 to something like 10 million. We've got a claim that the women saw a man and that man was Jesus. Okay? In other words, that Jesus actually is alive, that he was dead and now he's alive. So we've got all these mundane claims, and then we've got a claim which is so out there, so fantastic, so supernatural, goes against everything that we know about how life, the rules which govern life. In other words, that once your heart has stopped, once your brain has been starved of oxygen for more than, I think, 5 or 6 minutes, there will be irreversible brain damage. At 10, 15 minutes, the heart stopped, you are absolutely irreversibly dead. Okay? So the claim essentially is that Jesus came back from the dead, that Jesus rose from the dead. He was dead and now he's alive. So what I'm saying, my critique of people who are saying that the explanation that Jesus literally rose from the dead, he came back from the dead, people who are saying that is the best explanation which fits all the facts, or should I say purported facts, is complete nonsense. It doesn't hold water. It's got less credibility than ancient aliens, or aliens visiting and doing this, that, and the other, aliens coming and building the pyramids. It's got less validity than any of those fantastic claims which are not supernatural. So I don't see that anybody could rationally or reasonably claim that a set of mundane claims can be explained by an absolutely extraordinary claim, which on a magnitude, I mean, obviously I can't put a figure on it, but it would be an excess of 10 to the power of a million in terms of how big the claim is. It would be absolutely enormous. And this, guys, is why I reject the resurrection, that even if all those things are true, the claim is so unrealistic and so fantastic, it can't possibly be accepted as an explanation for a set of unsupernatural, fairly commonplace events. So there is, even if those things are all true, there is going to be a more plausible explanation for those events. I don't want to go through what those explanations are. Obviously, the body could have been stolen. The actual story that the three women saw somebody who looked like Jesus or claimed that he was Jesus could be just a story. It could just be a fabrication. And that's far more likely. It's even far more likely that if the women were there, that they really were unreliable and they really did lie. So all these things, all these other explanations are actually quite mundane as well. They actually match the so-called evidence. They actually match the circumstances. You've got a set of mundane circumstances, then the explanation can't be really much more fantastic than those mundane events. It can't be. And so we could have the body being stolen, or we could have the women lying, or we could have the gospel writers basically made it up. After all, they're trying to create a religion. All these things actually are very, very believable in my view. And of course, Christians will say, well, why were so many Christians prepared to die if Jesus didn't really rise from the dead? Okay, well, that's another argument. I will only point out about that many, many believers have died excruciating deaths in history for beliefs which they were really convinced about. You only have got to go back to the Middle Ages, and we see Protestants in England, rather than embracing Catholicism, which they almost believe like was the devil's representation of Christianity, rather than embracing Catholicism, we had Protestants in England who were urged to recant and convert to Catholicism, would rather die tied to a burning stake than convert to Catholicism. And the other way around too. When the shoe was on the other foot, we had Catholics who were prepared to die rather than give up their faith. And they certainly didn't see Jesus rise from the dead. So, all this thing about Pliny the Younger and everything, forget all that. People throughout history have died for strong beliefs. So that's for another video anyway. But just coming back and just recapping, we have got to keep on knocking away at the resurrection because, as it's been said, Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection. I don't see that there is any validity in or any credibility in the claim that Jesus rising for the dead is any kind of good explanation or credible explanation for all those mundane events which supposedly took place. It's just completely unbelievable that Jesus really did resurrect from the dead. No, a set of mundane events is most likely explained by another mundane event. In other words, fabrication, body was stolen, women lied, or whatever. All quite commonplace. That's my argument, guys. It's been a long video. Let me know what you think, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.